They leave. And for a while, it looks like they're fine, calm, certain, unbothered, like the decision made sense. But then, something shifts. Quietly, internally, they start to feel it. The absence, the silence, the space you used to fill. And that's when regret begins. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Because even though they left, they didn't disconnect the meaning. And here's the part no one talks about. They can regret leaving you and still not come back. Most people believe regret leads to action. If someone misses you, they reach out. If they realize they made a mistake, they come back. If the connection was real enough, they try again. That's the logic. Most people follow. But for the avoidance system, regret doesn't always create movement. Sometimes it creates silence. Because regret is not just a feeling, it's also an evaluation, a reflection on what happened and what might happen again. When the avoidant leaves, they often feel relief first. Relief from pressure, relief from expectation, relief from the internal tension they were carrying inside the connection. That relief can feel convincing, like confirmation. I made the right choice. This is better. This feels easier. And for a while, they settle into that. Less emotional demand, more autonomy, more internal space. But then, time does something. It removes the pressure, but it also removes the connection. And once the pressure is gone, what's left becomes clearer. The moments, the closeness, the way you showed up, the way it felt when things were good. And without the intensity that once overwhelmed them, they can finally feel what was actually there. This is where regret begins. Not as panic, as recognition. That mattered. That was real. I lost something. That wasn't easy to find. But here's where it becomes complex. Because alongside regret, another awareness remains. The same one that made them leave. I couldn't sustain it. I was going to pull away. I was going to change. It would have ended badly. So now they're holding two truths at the same time. I miss it, and I don't trust myself in it. And when those two coexist, movement becomes difficult because coming back is not just about reconnecting. It's about re-entering the same dynamic they already believed would fail. So even if they feel regret, even if they miss you, even if they recognize the value of what they had, they hesitate. Not because they don't feel, because they don't trust the outcome. This is why regret doesn't always lead to return. Because for the avoidant, emotion alone is not enough. It has to feel sustainable. And if their belief about themselves hasn't changed, then the outcome still feels predictable. If I go back, it will happen again. If I reconnect, I'll end up in the same place. If I try, I'll hurt them later. So instead of acting on regret, they contain it. They sit with it. They think about you. They remember. They feel. But they don't move. And from the outside, that silence feels like indifference, like they never cared, like it didn't matter, like you were easy to walk away from. But internally, it can be very different because they are not just feeling regret. They are also managing what they believe will happen if they act on it. And until that belief changes, regret stays internal, felt, but not followed, real, but not expressed. And that's what makes this pattern so confusing, because the feeling exists, but the action never comes. To understand why regret doesn't lead to return, you have to look at what happens inside the avoidance system after the separation settles, because the moment they leave is not the full story. It's only the first phase. What comes after is where the contradiction deepens. At first, as you already saw, there is relief, a real sense of release. from the pressure they were carrying, from the expectation to be consistent, from the emotional demand to stay present, from the quiet fear that they would eventually disrupt the connection. That relief is not fake. It is not an act. It is a genuine nervous system shift. For the first time in a while, they feel like themselves again, more regulated, more in control, more internally balanced. And that state can last days, weeks, sometimes longer. During that time, they are not focused on what was lost. They are focused on what was regained: space, autonomy, emotional quiet. And because that feels stabilizing, it reinforces the belief that leaving was the right decision, not because the connection didn't matter, but because staying felt unsustainable. So for a period of time, they settle into that conclusion. This was necessary. This is better for both of us. This avoids future damage. But then something subtle begins to shift. Not abruptly, gradually. The absence starts to become more noticeable, not as pain at first, as awareness. The absence of your presence, your messages, your energy, the way you showed up in their life. And here's what makes this stage important: the pressure that once overshadowed. The connection is no longer there. So now, when they think about you, they are not feeling the weight that came with it. They are feeling the parts that were meaningful, the ease in certain moments, the familiarity, the emotional safety that existed when things were calm. And because the pressure is gone, those memories are no longer filtered through overwhelm. They become clearer, more accessible, more emotionally available. This is when the internal narrative starts to change, not completely, but enough to create tension, because now the avoidant is not just remembering why they left, they are also remembering what they lost. And that combination creates conflict. On one side, there is recognition. That connection mattered. They were important to me. There was something real there. On the other side, there is the same underlying belief. I couldn't maintain it. I would have pulled away again. It would have ended the same way. This is where regret forms, not as a single emotion, but as a layered experience, a mix of missing and caution, a mix of appreciation and doubt, a mix of emotional pull and mental resistance. And this is where most people assume action should follow, because from the outside, it seems simple. If you miss someone, reach out. If you regret leaving, fix it. If it mattered, try again. But from inside the avoidance system, it is not that linear. Because coming back is not just about the past, it is about the future. And the future, to them, still looks the same. They don't just ask, "Do I miss this person?" They ask, "Will this end differently if I return?" And if the answer feels uncertain, or worse, predictable, they hesitate. Because returning doesn't just reopen connection, it reopens responsibility. The same expectations, the same emotional demands, the same internal pressure they once struggled to manage. And if nothing has changed inside them, then the outcome feels unchanged too. This is why regret alone is not enough. Because regret is emotional, but their decision is protective. And protection tends to override emotion, especially when the system believes it is preventing harm. So instead of acting on the feeling, they analyze it, they contain it, they rationalize it. This is just nostalgia. I'm remembering the good parts. It wouldn't actually work long term. I would end up in the same place again. These thoughts are not random. They are stabilizing. They help them stay aligned with the original decision. They prevent them from re-entering something they don't trust themselves to sustain. And over time, this creates a very specific state. They feel you without moving toward you. They think about you without reaching out. They miss you without acting on it. From the outside, this looks like nothing. Silence, absence, distance. But internally, it can be very active because they are not disconnected. They are contained, holding the feeling without letting it turn into action. And the longer this continues, the more it reinforces itself because each day they don't reach out, it becomes easier not to. Each moment they don't act, the distance becomes more normalized. And eventually, the regret doesn't disappear, but it becomes quieter, less urgent, less likely to lead to change. Not because it wasn't real, but because it was never followed. And this is the part that's hardest to understand from the outside, because you might be waiting for the moment they realize, the moment they feel enough to come back, the moment the regret becomes strong enough to override everything else. But for the avoidance system, that threshold is not just emotional, it is structural. It depends on whether they believe something has changed, not in the connection, in themselves. If they still see themselves as someone who cannot sustain closeness, then returning feels like repeating a mistake. Even if the feeling is still there, even if the connection still matters, even if part of them wants to try again. So they stay where they are, not fully moved on, but not moving back, in a space where regret exists, but does not lead anywhere. And that is why their silence can feel so confusing, because it is not empty. It is full of something they are choosing not to act on, not because it meant nothing, but because to them, coming back still feels like stepping into the same ending they already tried to prevent. Over time, regret doesn't disappear. It changes form. At first, it's sharp, noticeable, something they feel in quiet moments, when they think about you, when something reminds them. But as time passes, it becomes more subtle, less intense, more integrated, not gone, just contained. And this is where the outside perception and the internal reality completely separate. From the outside, it looks like they moved on. Message, no return, no attempt to reconnect. So it's easy to assume they're over it. They don't care. It didn't mean enough. But internally, that's not always true. Because avoidants are not good at acting on emotional realization, they are better at adapting to emotional absence. So instead of turning regret into action, they turn it into acceptance, not because they fully resolved it, because they learned to live with it. They adjust to the space. They normalize your absence. They build a routine that doesn't include you. And the longer that routine exists, the harder it becomes to disrupt it. Because coming back now is not just emotional, it's disruptive. It breaks the distance. They've stabilized. It reopens something they've already worked to contain. So even if the feeling is there, the resistance is stronger. This is where another layer appears. Pride, not in an ego sense, in a structural sense. They made a decision. They committed to it. They adjusted their life around it. So reversing that decision feels like losing control. It feels like, I was wrong. I misjudged this. I should have stayed. And for a system that relies on control to feel safe, that's not easy to face. So instead of returning, they stay aligned with the original choice, even if the emotional truth has shifted. This is why you can feel like they must know, they must feel it, they must realize what was lost. And sometimes they do, but realization doesn't guarantee movement, because movement requires more than feeling. It requires overriding fear, overriding doubt, overriding the belief that it will end the same way again. And if those things are still active, then staying away feels safer than coming back. There is also something else that happens here. Distance. creates a version of the connection that feels easier than reality. They remember the good moments, the calm parts, the way it felt when things were aligned. But they don't feel the full dynamic anymore. They don't feel the pressure that existed in real time. They don't feel the expectations that overwhelmed them. So the memory becomes cleaner than the experience, and that creates another conflict. What I remember feels good, but what I experienced felt heavy. So which one is real? To them, the heavier one feels more reliable because it's tied to their internal limits. So even if the memory pulls them, the belief pushes them back. And that push is often stronger because it's not emotional, it's protective. So they stay where they are, thinking about you, missing parts of it, feeling moments of regret, but not crossing the distance. And from your side, this creates a painful contradiction because you can feel that something was real. You can feel that it mattered. And yet, there's no movement to match that. No return, no attempt, no reopening, just silence. And silence can feel like closure. But in this dynamic, it's often not closure. It's containment. They didn't resolve everything. They just chose not to act on it. And that's what makes it so hard to understand. Because you're looking for behavior that matches feeling, and they're operating from a system where feeling doesn't always lead to behavior, especially when behavior feels like risk. So the regret stays internal, felt in moments, but never turned into action, not because it wasn't strong enough, but because the system still doesn't trust what would happen if they followed it. The most important shift happens here when you stop focusing on what they feel and start looking at what they do, because feelings, no matter how real, are not what build a relationship. Consistency does, presence does, follow through does. Someone can regret losing you and still not be capable of showing up for you. Someone can miss you and still not be able to stay connected in a stable way. Someone can care deeply and still not be able to choose you in action. And that's the part that matters most. Not because feelings don't matter, but because feelings alone don't create safety. This is where people get stuck. They hold on to the idea. If they feel it, then something is still there. If they regret it, then maybe they'll come back. If it mattered, then it's not really over. But that line of thinking keeps you emotionally tied to something that isn't moving because you're waiting for their internal world to turn into external action. And sometimes it never does. Not because you weren't enough, not because it wasn't real, but because they are still operating from the same structure that made them leave. And this is where your clarity becomes power. You start seeing the difference between emotional truth and relational reality. Emotional truth, they may miss you, they may regret it, they may think about you. Relational reality, they are not here, they are not choosing you, they are not building with you. And once you separate those two, you stop holding on to hope that isn't supported by action. You stop translating silence into hidden meaning. You stop trying to feel what they might be feeling in order to justify staying connected to the situation, because now you can see it clearly. What they feel is theirs. What they do is what affects your life, and your life cannot be built on what someone feels privately. It can only be built on what they show you consistently. This is where you take your energy back, not by forcing yourself to stop caring, but by shifting what you respond to. You stop responding to possibility and start responding to reality. And in reality, they didn't come back, not because you weren't worth it, but because they are not in a place where they can choose differently. And that matters, because your future is not built on someone's potential. It's built on someone's capacity, and capacity shows up in action, not in regret. So instead of asking, do they miss me? You begin asking, can they meet me? And that question changes everything because it moves you out of their internal world and back into your own, back into your standards, your needs, your emotional reality, where you don't have to guess. You don't have to interpret silence. You don't have to hold space for something that isn't showing up. You get to choose what actually chooses you. And that's not about closing your heart. It's about directing it towards something that can hold it. If this hit you, not just in your mind, but in your chest, comment, I choose reality below. Not as a statement to me, as a decision for yourself. Because this is the moment. You stop waiting for someone to turn regret into action and start choosing a connection where action is already there. And if you're ready to understand these patterns on a deeper level, stay with the inner Odyssey. Because once you truly see how these dynamics work, you don't just understand why things happened. You stop repeating what keeps hurting you, and you start choosing what actually feels stable, clear, reciprocal, real.